Thank you, Xavier. Any public speaker coach would tell someone that the worst way to start a presentation is with an apology. But Dave Owens told me a while ago that of the presenters over the next 3 days, I'm the only one whose mother tongue is English. So for that, I apologize. And as a consequence, I'll speak slow so that I'm clearly understood by everyone. The truth of the matter is, what I'm going to talk about for the next 15 minutes or so is something that was driven by the President of the United States. It was actually the President that sent Xavier and myself here to speak to you today about two topics. And it's not an exaggeration, which you'll discover very soon. Those topics are upset recovery and stall recovery. In fact, what happened was in 2008, there was a regional turboprop in Buffalo, New York that crashed. And in the aftermath of it, during the investigation, with the outcry of the families of the survivors and the media frenzy, which seems to go on with every accident that occurs, the politicians were forced to actually do something. And the result of that was that Congress and the President signed into law the requirement for the FAA to force carriers, to impose upon carriers, to train upset recovery and stall recovery. And in the aftermath of that, the FAA and many, many other regulatory bodies around the world went into a reactionary mode to try and come up with guidance for how to go about doing this. It's really tragic that it took an accident, that it actually took a politician to solve a problem for us in our industry. But that's the facts. The original upset training aid came out in 1998, after 4 years of working on it. And everything which is contained in the original version of the upset training aid is covered by that which Congress and the President signed into law. And so that from 10 years prior to that accident, had the training aid been implemented and required by operators to use, that quite likely many, many accidents and many, many lives that have been lost quite likely might have been saved. So once again, we found ourselves in a reactionary mode. So what am I going to talk about? Why Revision 3 of the upset training aid? What's new in Revision 3? And then I'll hand it back to Xavier, since I'm just giving him a breather here for a few minutes, to talk about unintended aircraft situations. So why Revision 3? It's actually very simple. ICAO requested it. For once, not a regulator, but certainly a respected global body had requested that we develop a Revision 3. In 2012, not long after the rule had been put in place in the United States, and with all of the regulators trying to react to it, ICAO hosted a program called LOCART. There are a couple of people in this room who were also part of that group. And LOCART acronym stood for Loss of Control, Awareness, and Recovery Training. This was a shared program that was with the FAA and ICAO, because the FAA were in the process of coming up with their advisory circular that Xavier was talking about a little while ago. ICAO came to me at that time because originally with the LOCART, with the upset training aid, there were two of us, one person from Boeing and myself who carried the coordination of the document between 1994 and 2008. And he had gone on to other things at his company, so I was the only one of the originals. But ICAO suggested that we develop a Revision 3, and that they would be happy to endorse this and use this as their source document, but they wanted inclusion of the straight-wing turboprop airplanes in the flying community. Well, I wasn't overly excited about that, because the upset training aid as it stood through Revision 1 and Revision 2 took care of all of the Airbus fleet. It was basically, you'll recall if you've read it, that it applies to swept-wing transport jets, 100 seats and greater. But the idea that ICAO would actually use this as the source document, and looking backwards at the number of accidents that quite possibly would not have occurred had the regulators and had the ATOs and the operators implemented that which was already existing within the documentation, might have been avoided. And so this was kind of a big motivator for me. But beyond that, there were two other reasons, two significant reasons. I thought, what's wrong with revision 2? You know, if you recall, the original document covered all of these airplanes and quite a large section of academics from the aerodynamics point of view, as well as a draft training program that everybody could use. Then revision 1 came along after a fairly highly visible accident in 2001, where the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board of the United States, and the FAA requested that Airbus and Boeing regroup the team, which was a pretty enormous team, to develop a revision to the training aid to include proper use of rudder, to recognize improper use of rudder, but to promote proper use of rudder. And then again, after an accident that Xavier had mentioned, there was reference to very high altitude work, so the second revision came about. So to satisfy the ICAO's requirements of including the regional straight-wing turboprops, I thought, what is wrong with revision 2? And with this fairly large group that was at the low-cart deliberations at ICAO in Montreal, most of the people would say, oh yes, this is quite a good document, we all use it. But then I would discover that they would reference things that were not in the document, but actually were in the document. And the reason why is that pilots in general are lazy people. They will do the simplest thing possible, and so what they will do is they'll focus on bullets and bold print and points that highlight what's important to them. And they'll miss out all of the other information in a matter of expediency. So what that meant is that a lot of the information that was in the existing Revision 1 and Revision 2 was not being looked at. The matter is, it's important to read beyond the bold print. Well, Airbus had come along, and Dominique mentioned this in his opening this morning about documentation. Airbus came along with a really great method on the 380 and the 350, and it's finding its way to other fleets, of using descriptive units where we've got different levels of information, of need to know, nice to know, and an academic level. And this seemed to me to be a very good method of applying the upset training aid so that the user could actually look at this document and take, this is what I must know, and this they will read, and that which is nice to know, they have the choice as to whether they go to that or not. So this was a very big motivator for me. Secondly, was during the low-cart deliberations, the chair asked if I would chair a subcommittee of OEMs, of 5 OEMs, consisting of Airbus, of ATR, of Boeing, of Bombardier, and of Embraer. And there was an epiphany for me, because at this point I'd been working on upset recovery training aid for over 17 years. And I discovered at the very first meeting with the other OEMs, we had a tremendous amount in common. The original training aid took us nearly 5 years to produce, because it was a huge group consisting of airline pilots, of trade unions within the industry, of regulators. And to have such a large group to develop a consensus document, we were actually pretty lucky to get it out in 5 years. But what we discovered with the 5 OEMs is that we all spoke the same language. We faced the same challenges. That our experience that we had, as Xavier had alluded to in the development of an airplane, and of seeing how all the airplanes are operated around the world, is real-time feedback, real-time input, and not assumptions and conclusions that we make while working in the simulators, which was the case with the original document. So between those two topics, I became really motivated towards chairing this group. But I said to ICAO, I would go to Mark Parasis to achieve approval to go ahead with this. Mark Parasis and Fernando Alonso, who was running the flight test division at that time, to which they both agreed to go ahead with the concept. But the proviso was that we would not get together this massive group once again to try and yet again reinvent the wheel, which already works pretty well if it's used. That the group would consist of only the OEMs with one additional input, and that is a member from ICAO, since it would be their source document. So, what's new in Revision 3? In fact, there's quite a bit that's new. I've touched on it already. It includes turboprop transport aircraft. Now, the way that this training aid will be available to the user is they'll have three options to enter into the training aid. The first one is to select T, which would be for turbine, swept wing, P for propeller, which would only give the specifics associated with your airplane, or T and P, which would be a collection of both, a very simple selection at the onset. And for all you users out there, when it is available on the market, I would recommend that you use the T and P for two reasons. One is there's not a tremendous amount of difference between the two, but I think that probably most of us started on some sort of a straight-wing propeller airplane, and the review is very, very healthy for looking at the overall context of the training aid. The second item, which is a major change, and it just came about very recently with an idea that I got while at the EASA rulemaking for upset recovery, and that is the actual definition, which we formed over a long period of consensus building in the 90s. And in the original one, we said unintentional exceedance of plus 25, minus 10, 45 degrees of bank, or at inappropriate speeds. What we've done is we have removed the parameters, because the parameters have been misleading for two reasons. One is that between the initial document and Revision 1, feedback we had from industry was that many pilots thought that unless I've exceeded 25 degrees or 45 degrees of bank, I'm not upset, which of course is preposterous. They had read the bullets. They had not read the paragraph before the bullets, which said that any time an airplane is diverging from what the pilot wants it to do, it's in an incipient phase, and that the object of the exercise is to stop the divergence at the earliest possible time. But on top of that, we've mentioned evidence-based training here. And what happens in our community is we develop terms and definitions for terms, and then we make training scenarios to fit those terms. And in this particular case, we've got maneuver-based training and we've got scenario-based training. Well, if you've got these parameters for upsets, it's very easy to have a scenario-based training, which is in the early development phase, and it's even more easy to do everything that Xavier said we shouldn't be doing, which is close your eyes while the instructor or a button at the iOS puts this into some bizarre gyration, open your eyes, and go ahead and recover. By changing the definition, we've totally removed that divide. And now the new definition will read, an airplane upset is an undesired airplane state characterized by unintentional divergences from parameters normally experienced during operations. So therefore, there's no assumption. There cannot be an assumption that the pilot is asleep until the airplane is in some weird gyration and then told it's time to get re-engaged, to recover situational awareness, and try and get the blue side back up again. 3 levels of content in the new training aid. The 3 levels are very, very important. It's a takeoff precisely from the work that my colleagues in STL have come up with over the years, and the other OEMs are absolutely excited about it as well. Improved graphics. We'll be making use of videos, of computer-generated videos from the DFDR, and embedded videos from each of the OEMs. And we've introduced an element of startle. You saw a PFD on the slide here a little while ago for just a few seconds. And that's a taste of what this element of startle is all about, because it's a challenge in the training business to come up with a surprise in the simulator. By virtue of being in the simulator, you know that there are certain items that are going to occur. By showing a PFD for a short period and then behind it having questions to draw the attention to the pilot of what should be focused on first before you put your hands and feet into gear is the whole purpose. And we think that it'll be an effective method of surprise. Additionally, a big change from the original and the first two revisions is that the OEMs are going to recommend what to be trained, substantiate why it should be trained, and then we leave it to the ATOs to decide how to go about doing it. You are the training experts, and as such, you should be developing the training for your particular organizations, but we will supply the guidance of what should be done. And we also need, very, very important, and just to amplify something that had been said by Xavier a while ago, it's to correct incorrect assumptions. At the onset, back in the 90s, because we had a room of training experts, we all had the assumption that pilots are already proficient throughout the envelope of their airplane. And as Xavier pointed out, this is absolutely not true. Passing a type rating or a proficiency check is not a measure of how well and how globally within the entire envelope of the airplane that pilots are proficient. So having said that, it's rather a leap of faith to think that you can go from that green area to beyond the gray arrows with a close your eyes scenario and expect pilots to have a legitimate expectation of recovering. With that, I will hand the mic back over to Xavier to talk about undesired aircraft states.
So let's continue on that. As Larry explained, it's this one. What is an undesired aircraft state? We have to go away from this. Oh, startle again. You see how you can ask, was it nose up, nose down? You remember? Left or right bank? So an undesired aircraft state is an unintentional divergence. So we have to stop to say the aircraft is not upset until it reaches certain limits. As soon as the aircraft is not going where you want or is not doing what you want, you come into an undesired aircraft state that you have to recover and you have to control it. So it's only limits? No, it's continuously. I want to fly 250 knots. The speed is decreasing. I don't know why. Is it due to wind? Is it due to temperature inversion? But no, I have to control it again. Be engaged, as Larry said. So, for training on upset recovery training, what do we have actually? No, this one. Startle, it's blocking me. Can you move the slides, please? Hello. Yeah. Undesired aircraft states. Hola, it's. It came. Well, that's all. That's quick. So we had the stall training. You have the video. I will not come back on that, but it gives you a complete information of one of the upset of an aircraft, which is a stall. Remember what you see in this video. It's done during test flight. And it's not aimed to reproduce what we do in the video. And as well, if you have this kind of situation, you apply what is written in your FCOLM flight crew training manual. Next, so we have an OTT on that, on stall recovery as well. I do hope that you're all familiar with that. If you don't have this document, don't hesitate to contact us, and we will provide it to you. So upset recovery training. It's not about that, of having fun in the simulator or to scare the other pilot. No. The idea is to control the aircraft within certain limits. These are little photos that I took when doing some exercises in the simulator. And what is quite important is things that we want to replicate and put into the data package. That if you come into upset situation, that you see that the angle of attack remains with reasonable values. The same in nose down or nose up, that you can recover. And this we'll try to introduce. So this is what we have to avoid and prevent, to come into those situations. For that, we will issue, as I said, an OTT by the end of this week. Normally, I hope so. Or it's next week then. On nose high recovery techniques and nose low recovery techniques. There are two parts in that. Pay attention on some items that you see. They are next to each item little numbers which are giving reference to a text next to it. If you have a nose high recovery technique and you see roll adjust, and we say adjust bank angle not to exceed 60 degrees, it's only and only, if you look to the bullet 3, if all normal pitch control techniques are unsuccessful. This means you push, you use a trim, or you use the elevator, and it's not working, only then and only then we recommend you to take some bank in nose to have the nose down. It's not the standard technique. So you really have to see all the little points and emphasis. At the first glance you say, okay, I have to hold it sharp. No. Look to this. Inform your pilots and look if they do it correctly when you train. The same in the nose low recovery technique. There is a template as well that will come out in the OTT and will provide you with more information than in our FCOM and our FCTM. So the exercises, when you do that, are instructor-led exercises. It's maneuver-based training when prevention has failed. So prevention is the key. You do everything to avoid to come into those situations. It's an alternate low, the training that we do. You can do some in normal low, but we recommend to do it in alternate low or degraded low in an aircraft. Question of the motion. Do we use motion off or motion on? Well, basically, we say as long as you stay within the normal envelope of the simulator, the validated training envelope of the simulator, you can use it. If there is a risk of going beyond, don't use the motion, because it will not be representative. The simulator is representative in the normal low envelope, there you can use it. If you go further, don't use it, because you will not have the extreme G's that you will feel in a real aircraft. And again, instructor training is needed. The instructor must have knowledge on the simulator limitation, must have knowledge on the correct recovery training, must have knowledge and must be able to demonstrate going towards an upset, and as well to correct the upset and demonstrate the correct recovery techniques. Exercises, the first one will be published in our next OTT. To conclude, a sentence that I modified a little bit from an astronaut, Frank Bowman, and I say we change the word a little bit. An engaged pilot, Larry talked about it, I talked about that. You have to be engaged. An engaged pilot uses his superior judgment to avoid situations in which require the use of his superior skills. Thank you.